Hello everyone. In the prior recordings, I discussed a Moze theory and talked about builds. This recording is going to focus on what weapons would be best for those builds. I'm surprised I didn't think about doing this sooner. I want to thank the person that commented for triggering that. It's a great idea. We'll go and talk about it. So let's get on with it. In order to get on with it, I need to talk about Moze again. The build I did for Moze was more balanced. It was designed to be both infantry and mech pilot. As far as I know from watching gameplays and things, Moze has the longest cooldown action skill. It sadly does not last long either. I think if class mods are returning to Borderlands 3, it may fix the issue, assuming they have cooldown on it. But yeah, either way, I was trying to be versatile with it. There is an alternative to the Moze build in which you just focus on being infantry rather than a mech pilot. And that's this build here. Mine's a modification of that because of a mechanical discussion. Other people are saying that Desperate Measures works with Thin Red Line, but I highly doubt that. Based on my knowledge from doing theory discussions and theory crafts in other games, it is not normal for a skill that says the lower your health is to trigger with reserved health. And let's just say even if that is a possibility of making that work, you're reserving a crap ton of your health. This would make the build very difficult to work with in certain situations. Some of the bosses in Borderlands 2, I think it was, they hit so hard that they took out your shields in one hit and went to some of your HP. So I don't see this as a safe build. I guess you could do it if you want to, but I'm going to choose not to. So in that regard, I decided to dump the necessary amount of points to get down to force feedback. We'll talk about that in a minute, because that's going to relate to the gun discussion. But everything else here is straightforward. I wanted to make sure the build was as safe as possible, so that's why I didn't go Selfless, Vengeance, Thin Red Line, or this. So because I had some excess points left over that needed to be spent somewhere in order to get down here, I just spent it in Drowning in Brass. Honestly, I don't see much use in kill skills, but I guess if you have leftover points and there's nothing real else to do with them, then fine. But moving on, yeah, so under this tree, I did switch things up a little bit. Again, I'm not really seeing the point of match set. Scrappy, maybe, but match set, not so much. However, I did have points left over, so it was one of those things that's just kind of like, okay, I'll put it there because it does increase magazine size. So when it came time to do this build, it was a choice of putting one more point in Scrappy, one more point in match set, and I was just kind of like, well, Scrappy already gives you 10% handling, which is probably more than enough to compensate for sway during movement. So I might as well just go put in match set. But yeah, remember that you can do a COV build with Moze, so this build actually would be sort of more geared towards it. The one thing that you would want to change is redistribution and forge. Oh, and also the Iron Bank too, because magazine stuff is not going to really apply to them, I don't think. So you want to make sure this is maxed out and this is maxed out if you did COV. But yeah, so this is the Moze infantry build. That's just so you can get more bonuses out of the guns if you're playing her. Now, with all that discussed, let's go ahead and talk about force feedback as it also relates to why I'm selecting these guns. So notice it will say critical kill on it. This means you have to kill the enemy through a critical. This more than likely indicates weak points on an enemy. Even though the description says just click on their heads, it's not going to be 100% true. As we saw in some of the Borderlands 3 playthrough stuff, there are some enemies that have helmets on their head, meaning you're not going to get headshots with them. The weakness for some of those enemies is like their backpacks or something else. So, yeah, you're actually banking your entire life into something that may or may not happen. But yeah, so the reason it relates to Moz and the other ones is because Moz is dependent on it for her skills. Zane has passives that deal with accuracy, so Zane actually can be pretty effective at hitting those areas, more so than the others, more than likely. Alright, with that all discussed, let's get into the weapons now. We'll go ahead and start with what works best with Moz. For Moz, the problem is that she does have some of her damage typed into Incendiary. So, while Moz could potentially work with Jakobs, Jakobs is just going to be physical damage. So you're losing out on damage there. The question remains is, can that damage from Jakobs compensate for the loss of not having Incendiary? As a result, I would put Jakobs pretty low on the priority list. What I would put higher up on the priority list is Hyperion, Dahl, or Torgue. Torgue has rocket launchers, so that always helps. Dahl gets bonus damage based on the alternative fire mode for that weapon. So I did see a burst fire sniper rifle in one of the playthroughs. That means that its bonus damage would come from single fire, not burst fire. Regardless, it's pretty cool that you can do that with Dahl. It means that Dahl weaponry is going to be a versatile option. It can work with different situations. Hyperion gets more accurate the more it's fired. In addition, it has that gun shield thing going on. I would say that more than likely what's going to happen is the gun shield is going to be way too thin to really depend on it, but it's one of those things that just helps here and there. So with Moz, I would say Dahl would be more important than Hyperion, but either could be just as fine. We'll discuss Vladof at the end. Alright, moving on to Zane. If you remember from the prior build, Zane is entirely reliant on his shields being at 100%. Another thing too I want to point out with Zane is this paragraph right here. Pressing F or G while barrier is active picks up and holds the barrier, but the size and bonuses are decreased. That means you do not want to be mobile with Zane if you can help it. Zane gets his full bonuses by being stationary with the barrier. That's actually why I didn't do the movement skills for his barrier skill. It's because I knew right away that he needs all of his bonuses to make sure he gets every ounce of advantage. Not only that, Zane does get accuracy when his shield is up, so that might be able to compensate for the mobility problems. When you're mobile, you'll have sway and all that, so that might compensate for it, but it won't compensate for it like Moz will, because Moz has a direct passive towards handling. So something to keep in mind with that. Now, if your bonuses are up, Zane will have an incredible amount of accuracy to work with. This means that he will have a much easier time hitting those areas that are considered critical to an enemy. Like I mentioned earlier, it could be a backpack, or it could be something else. It's not going to be the helmet all the time, like it was in the prior Borderlands. Knowing that, with Zane, I would say a similar priority. I would put a higher priority on Hyperion than Dahl, just because, like I said, even if the gun shield doesn't cover everything, it gives you that small chance to avoid losing your bonuses. So Hyperion is much more valuable to Zane than anybody else because he is reliant on his shields being up at all times. Of course, Dahl would be a great weapon for Zane, just because Zane is pretty broad. All of its gun damage, there's nothing here specific to elemental damage besides this one right here. Calm, Cool, and Collected. We'll get to that in a second. For that reason, you can work with Hyperion or Dahl, just like Moz. The one change I would make is Maliwan. While Torgue may do a lot of damage, I'm thinking Maliwan probably can do as much damage due to the Maliwan weapons now having that charge up ability. The charge up ability consumes more ammunition, but it does more damage. Thanks to Zane's barrier ability, he has the breathing room to ensure that he can get a full charge out. So Zane could actually become an elemental nuker quite easily. This gives you the room to actually use Calm, Cool, and Collected if you're using a Maliwan weapon. So, yeah, we'll see where things go, but more than likely, Maliwan will replace Torgue for Zane. I guess you could use Jakobs with Zane because he's not restricted to elemental besides that one skill. But they are kind of hard to control, so you may not be able to get that pinpoint shot on enemy like you would with Dahl, because Dahl actually has really great handling to begin with. Alright, with the weapon priorities discussed for Zane and Moz, I'm going to go ahead and now focus on Vladof. There's a reason Vladof hasn't shown up in my priority list. It is interesting that it does get weapon attachments, has a crazy high rate of fire and all that, but it's hard to control. That's the one downfall to this. Another downfall is the attachments. They consume a crazy amount of ammo in a lot of cases. So even if you were, say, Moz with Forge, you would still have a difficult time keeping up with this, more than likely. Dahl just makes sure, ensures that each bullet is being used wisely. Because Dahl has really great weapon handling, you can ensure that all bullets hit. With Vladof, you don't get that certainty because of just how fast the rate of fire it is. The recoil goes up way too quickly. There is bipods on Vladof weapons in some cases, but even with a bipod, it's still not going to be as good as Dahl, I think. The problem with the bipod is it reduces your movement speed. You would have to pray that you're stationary to make use of the bipod. So again, Dahl is just versatile for that reason. I'm not saying Vladof is a bad weapon, it's just, in my opinion, it's not really going to do as much as some of the others. If you happen to get a Vladof weapon, during your early leveling, then great. But I would try getting to one of these pretty quickly, as they're just more valuable. One more thing I want to cover before I end the recording is this right here. I have linked this in the article, I have linked this in the prior recording, so you more than likely saw this. But this is not the only article talking about it. It's pretty easy to see that there are other manufacturers out there that just haven't been released, so we haven't seen them yet. Out of the ones that have been there, I recognize Anshin and Pangolin as being the manufacturers of shields from prior Borderlands. If Anshin and Pangolin are going to be weapon based now as well as shield, it makes me wonder if Anshin and Pangolin will have weapons that actually give shields to an ally. Kind of like Anna from Overwatch, I think is her name. If that's the case, that would be really cool. Moz would actually be perfect for that because of Forge. She'd be able to keep up the support. But yeah, so I'm going to end the recording here. I'll link this article as it's a pretty recent one. This one's kind of older, and hopefully you can see more of the guns that way. But yeah, that's the most I have. Thanks for listening.